Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review a show called Devil's Line. This is a show I went on to Hulu and just started watching. Recently, it's been a while since I've watched anything anime. I just haven't found the right thing yet. I haven't found a thing that compels me to do a review on something. And after watching this one, I'm like, okay, I can see this being a thing that might intrigue some people and might intrigue me also to continue watching. So, I do have within this show there's kind of a positive negative about this show. Honestly, I went into 3 episodes of the show, and I would say after watching 3 episodes, one, I feel like there wasn't anything to invest in these 3 episodes. I think really you have to maybe invest in the story overall, or you have to invest in the interesting attack sequences that this show goes into. Whenever there's a vampire that ends up attacking somebody, I like how aggressive it is. Like, to me, this show much more reminds me of a werewolf show than a vampire show, because there seems something about these vampires that seems more animalistic than I've seen in quite a while. I like the fact how every bit of something that a vampire does has a escalation to it, especially once you introduce a vampire to blood. Man, do they just go freaking wild. It's interesting to watch. So, going on into here, we have it to where I guess if you could have to put a gun to my head and say what should I invest in the show, a I would say a relationship that is seemingly growing between two people. A character that I believe is Yuki and Tyra or Tara. I think that's how I'm just going to pronounce them in this show. And if the names are ill pronounced, I apologize, but I'm just going to keep calling them that. The main girl, which she gets into being, I would call her like the Lois Lane-esque like person, and Yuki is kind of the Superman-esque like person, where Tara gets in trouble and Yuki goes in and tries to save her consistently, or tries to protect her from something, and we kind of unravel this whole relationship between these two people. All while that is going on, we find out some parts of this vampire society, how something as simple as sex has to be micromanaged or scrutinized for a vampire to be able to have sex with a normal person. I I thought the longer that I would go about this, the more story I would get, the more background something I would get. But it seems that no, that's not exactly how this show goes. It just kind of feels like you're getting snippets of story here and there that kind of quickly gets resolved to go on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It seems that we have Yuki, who is a vampire that is working with the detectives. There is some kind of tactical force or whatever that is seemingly trying to take care of vampires who are getting out of control or have to be put down or this and that. And so really the opening sequence for Yuki, where he goes and just is attacking people and just chucking them around, is just a really interesting scene that I think buys you into the show. So, if anything, wait for this vampire to go and grab these people and chuck them around like they're nothing and run through them like they're nothing. I think sells you on this show more so than anything else, I think. And so we eventually go along here and notice that it seems that they have to tranquilize vampires to try to get them to, if they have a bloodlust, if they need to be put down, most of the time they end up getting tranquilized. Where we have it where Yuki ends up tranquilizing someone else to stop them from going and attacking a person who of which that he is with. But there are also other times where there is times when Yuki kills somebody or attacks someone because rightfully so. So I thought that this show was, there was little things about it that kept making me want to go, you know what, I kind of want to see how this unravels, bizarrely. There was something about it visually, or I kind of liked the gruesomeness or the goriness or the viciousness of these stories. How we have these vampires just consistently, you would see them covered with blood, and they are to now help you understand how they got that way. And there's a whole kind of quick little story about how that was done and approached and so on and so forth. And I thought that was really interesting. The only real the only real problem I have is I don't think that there is, I want there to be more action. I want to seemingly have more things going on within these 3 episodes. I just don't think there is enough going on for these episodes. And I'm quite possibly thinking that maybe there's an escalation to these episodes, but then also I can just see these episodes just going the way they go, and me just going, having egg on my face, just going, yeah, this show never picked up. It just kept going and going and going. But yeah, so I think it's about time for me to go into spoilers about these episodes. So let's go and do that. Yeah, so if anything, Yuki kind of sells us on this show, and then kind of we just have to get invested in a relationship, and we have to eventually get interested in what is to come up next, kind of thing, is I think the only thing with this show that we can really do. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I get to spoil these episodes. So we have Yuki, who in the very beginning of this, he is transforming into a vampire, and Yuki ends up being spotted by some detectives, and you can just see Yuki is just like transformed, and he's like, and he's angry as all F. And so we have Yuki, who is just running through these guys. He's chucking them, tossing them, killing all of them, a bunch of people, to where eventually Yuki and Juliana Lloyd, who is another detective who is also a vampire as well, that is also working with this this police force, and she gets to do man, my voice, but she gets to do some interesting scenes as well, where there's some scenarios and stuff where there's crime scenes that have blood with them, and Juliana is trying as much as possible to not look directly at this person because she can't, or otherwise she'll lose control. So we have it to where Yuki seems to get his head on straight, eventually going and tranquilizing himself. I don't know how many freaking times within these episodes. So we have Yuki eventually going on a subway, and he is kind of interestingly looking after this girl named Tara, who is with some friend of hers. And so we have it to where Tara and her friend are walking through the streets, and they are thinking they're being followed by this Yuki guy. And so, excuse me, we have it to where they are running through these streets all crazy like, and we end up finding out that the real true villain is not this Yuki guy, it's Tara's friend that seems to really talk about how like they're the best of friends, and this friend is going and hugging Tara or Tiara. I'm going to just call her Tara the rest of this time. He's hugging her, he's blowing wind into her ear, and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do all that." And so we have Yuki interrupt them to basically mention that, hey, this guy is a vampire, he's a villainous person, and so we have it to where Tiara's friend ends up transforming into being a vampire, gets the fangs out, gets the red, yellow eyes, and so Yuki mentioned how Tiara's friend went and seduced women and killed them, numerous women, and Yuki is assuming that Tara is going to be next. And so we have it to where this friend of hers goes in for an attack. Yuki ends up tranquilizing him, taking him down. And so we find Yuki talking to Tara and finding out that she had scraped her face. And Yuki mentions, "Oh my god, you have a little blood in your face." And so we have it to where Yuki ends up starting to almost lose control, almost kissing this girl, and he ends up tranquilizing himself in the leg, and then calling out, "Hey guys, I have a tranquilized vampire here. Go and pick him up and book him, Dano." So we have Yuki going off. So Yuki has restrained himself. Yuki is doing very well. So we find out information that I guess the vampires, if they want to have sex with any normal human, they can do it, but they have to be watched over by a doctor, which is bizarre. So we have it to where Yuki and Tara keep bumping into one another, and so we have it to where Tara ends up going and thanking Yuki for like basically saving her life, and Yuki mentions that this girl has to be much more cautious, and so Yuki is kind of watching over her, and it seems that eventually Tara is wanting to almost try and date Yuki, trying to put on some dinner for her to eat while he is just kind of there keeping her company. And so we eventually have Tara going to her school. And so she goes to school to return a book to find her teacher is still at this school, I guess burning the candle at both ends. So we have it to where Tara is going to try and return this book, and the teacher is going to hand her yet another one. But then eventually he ends up grabbing her and ends up almost hurting her. But before this guy can go any further, because this guy could quite possibly be a monster at any point in time, but he's not actually a vampire, seemingly. We have Yuki busting into a window to attack this teacher, and then eventually he is to leave. Yuki mentions to Tara that basically to say, hey, tell the authorities you were attacked by a vampire, and I'll leave. Yuki ends up getting Tara's blood from off that window, and he ends up, by having to forcibly just get rid of the blood, he ends up just licking it, and it's one of those where he didn't purposely try to get her blood, it just happened that way. And so we have it to where eventually Yuki goes off to a call of a woman that had been making dinner for her husband, and while her and her husband, I guess, were both trying to make dinner, her husband accidentally cut his finger, and so her husband had mentioned to her, it's like, well, hey, since I cut my finger, how about you just lick the blood off, because this girl is a vampire. And so we ended up having this woman who loses control and evidently just murders her husband, and then is on this rooftop covered with blood with a knife in hand. And so we end up having Yuki coming to this woman and kind of like talking her off the ledge, so to speak. Basically mentioning how kind of very how foolish her husband was and how foolish she was for being, I guess, tempted to do these stupid, silly things that would get this woman to be where she is right now, on this ledge, basically. with blood all over her, now having a dead husband. How they made so many stupid mistakes to lead her to this moment. And so Yuki is kind of talking this woman off the edge to basically say, hey, how about you just get a tranquilizer and like we go back to square one and you get arrested and you get taken care of and so on and so forth. And so this girl goes along with it and realizes all the stupid things that she had done to lead up to this point, and she goes and gladly gets arrested. So we have it to where Tiara is going to school and is just daydreaming about Yuki, and it seems that she wants nothing more but to have Yuki probably bite her and turn her into a vampire, possibly. She keeps having seemingly daydreams about her just covered in blood and Yuki just having his way with her, I guess. So we have it to where Tara is telling, you know what, I've met this vampire, it seems things are working out, and she has a family or a friend telling her, it's like, dude, you have a friend who's a vampire? Isn't that a stupid mistake? Isn't that a little risky for you to do something like that? And Tara says, no, like, completely different scenario. Yuki is working for the authorities and all kinds of things. It's not, like, it's a completely different scenario than what would be normally. So, we end up eventually having this story be taken to be around Christmas time, and it seems that Yuki and Tara are going to give gifts to one another. And like we have a whole thing about that where it seems that these two characters are really having like legitimate moments with one another to, because we have it to where Yuki gives Tara his coat, and Tara mentions how great the coat was and how she really liked it and so on and so forth. So, pushing on. So, we eventually have in this episode a vampire who bumps into Tara and helps her with her groceries. And Tara doesn't think anything of it because this vampire was really nice. But then eventually she ends up seeing the blackened eyes, which she also sees on Yuki, which she's like, oh, well, he's a vampire because Yuki had restrained himself from having blood. And so this same vampire is just like that. And so we eventually have to where Tara is to have this stranger guy go into her home because it seems that this guy just wants a shelter. This guy is basically homeless. And so Yuki is like, oh my god, how could you have this guy in your home right now? And how could you do this? And so we end up having Yuki calling the authorities to have a background check done on the guy that is with Tara. And it seems that there is a match for this guy to be put in lockup. And so we have this stranger telling Yuki, hey man, like I'm completely a non-violent vampire, If anything, there was one instance where I accidentally almost got into a fight, or there was one instance where I got into a fight with somebody, but I ended up running off. And then I realized that if I were to ever get into another fight again, that I should just run away from it. It was a small mistake, and like I'll try to never repeat that again. Because I guess vampires don't realize how they can easily kill people, or how they can easily uh, just tear people apart, because we have it to where this stranger mentions how he had gotten into a fight, I believe, with a family member of his, and he ended up killing this family member and drinking his blood. And then he realized after that fight that he had with that person that he is never going to fight another person as long as he lives. And he is going to try, and if he's ever to get in a fight again, just run off. So every single one of these vampire-like things always gets easily resolved without them having to do much of fighting or much of whatever. And a lot of these stories are fairly interesting, and especially the first pilot episode, I think really gets you fascinated of what is to happen next within this story. I think really, if you're not sold by episode 1, then you might as well not even watch the rest of the show. Because I think the first episode is really good. I think everything that kind of happens after that is honestly kind of filler a little bit, but the stories are intriguing enough to see how difficult it is for vampires in this world, and also to see their aggression and their buildup of how they are going to otherwise survive in this world when it's so difficult for them to do any number of things within the show. So, with that said, I think that's all that I really wanted to get into within these first 3 episodes. Not much of spoilers within here, but there's also not much of story either. So, because there's just kind of like these half things going on. It's a lot of just half done stories. And we have it to where eventually after Yuki is to book this guy, we have it to where this doctor is checking up on Yuki to mention, hey, how many tranquilizers do you have? Like, it's been a long time since you've made an appointment. How about you make another appointment? And Yuki says, well, I don't have very many tranquilizers left. I only have one left. And the doctor's like, oh my god, you're really running through those tranquilizers. So we have it to where Yuki makes an appointment for the doctor for tomorrow. And so eventually we'll see how that goes. So with that said, yeah, interesting episode so far. Again, we'll kind of see where this show goes. If you guys are interested in having me talk about this show more, maybe a lot of people had seen this show and be like, yeah, the story gets better the later it goes on, or oh yeah, no, this story goes the exact same way throughout the entire thing. Like, to me, this show kind of reminds me of a noirish kind of show, like a detective noirish kind of show where it doesn't end in bloodshed, it doesn't end in gunfire, and it just ends up having vampires realizing that they need to stop they need to realize what they're doing, and that is, I think, the most interesting thing about this show, is to see these people that can really just beat the living crap at anybody and be all kinds of bloody and viciousness and so on and so forth, but there also has to be a point where they have to pull back, or there is no going back past a certain point. So, other than that, I think I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.